Even for the hardened New York police officers with years of experience fighting crime, who are used to dealing with the most brazen criminal elements, some cases can be a real challenge. Sometimes the audacity and insidiousness of criminals knows no bounds. It was precisely such an incredibly ingenious crime that experienced detectives, who had dedicated over 2 decades to serving the law, encountered. This case was striking in its inventiveness and unprecedented nature. One September day in 2016, an agitated 35-year-old woman called the police station to report a theft. When the patrol officers arrived at the scene, the victim, who introduced herself as Olga Tsvik, a Ukrainian immigrant working as a beauty salon master, reported the disappearance of valuable items from her bedroom. The woman complained of severe malaise, dizziness, and nausea, which had forced her to seek medical attention. Periodically, she would lose consciousness. Even after returning from the hospital, Olga seemed somewhat confused and stunned. Given the unusual circumstances of the incident, the police carefully questioned the victim about recent events. Among the unpleasant encounters, Olga recalled an intrusive client, Victoria Nasirova, who had shown up at her doorstep that day, demanding an urgent eyelash extension. Despite their long-standing acquaintance and even a certain friendship, Victoria's visits to the beauty salon had recently been accompanied by increasingly brazen behavior. That time, the woman was particularly persistent. Olga tried to explain that such procedures were performed exclusively at the salon, as she had a strict policy of not serving clients at home, but any arguments were futile. In the end, to get rid of the pesky visitor, she reluctantly agreed to a home visit. In addition, the victim mentioned that she had recently declined Victoria's invitation to hang out together. Another interesting detail was the striking physical resemblance between Olga and her pushy client, which had always somewhat perplexed the master. During the questioning, it was revealed that when Victoria appeared at Olga's apartment, she brought along 3 appetizing pieces of cheesecake from the most exquisite local confectionery. Savoring the treats, the guest quickly polished off 2 portions and literally pushed the third one onto the hostess. Shortly after the brief tea party and cheesecake tasting, Olga's condition drastically deteriorated, she became nauseous, and later the woman lost consciousness for a whole half-hour. Coming to her senses, the frightened woman called an ambulance by dialing 911. She was hospitalized, but the tests did not reveal any alarming abnormalities. Upon returning home, Olga discovered the disappearance of valuable items and turned to the police. However, initially, the law enforcement officers treated her story with skepticism, suspecting that the woman's strange behavior and poor health could be the result of using prohibited substances, and the rest was merely a figment of her morbid imagination. But Olga resolutely denied these assumptions and insisted on her version of events. She was convinced that the ill-fated cheesecake was the cause of her malaise and expressed suspicions about possible poisoning. Carefully examining the scene, the police noticed a package from a local bakery in the trash can. The victim recognized the box in which Victoria had brought the suspicious dessert. Taking the container with the remains of the pastry as evidence, the officers sent the find for examination, hoping to shed light on this tangled story. Unfortunately, the test results did not reveal any dangerous components. However, Olga did not give up and continued to insist on her version, appealing to the fact that during her stay in the hospital, the medics had thoroughly checked her body for the presence of foreign substances. Law enforcement officers contacted the medical facility with an official request but were refused any information about the patient's condition and examination results due to privacy policies. This only reinforced the detective's skepticism about the victim's testimony. An attempt to locate the suspicious client Victoria also yielded no results. Thus, the investigation hit a dead end. The case only moved forward the next day when Olga's neighbor noticed a suspicious person near her apartment. The stranger came and left several times, lurking around the beauty master's home. Encountering the neighbor face to face, the strange woman reported that her friend Olga was unwell, after which she hastily left the building. The alarmed neighbor decided to check on Olga and was surprised to find the apartment door ajar. Peeking inside, the woman saw a shocking scene. Despite the stifling summer heat, a heater was running at full capacity in the dwelling. And on the bed lay an unconscious Olga, dressed in a bizarre combination of revealing lingerie and warm sweatpants. The floor was littered with pills of potent medications, so it all looked like a suicide attempt. The frightened neighbor immediately called 911, describing the mysterious visitor as an attractive dark-haired woman who looked exactly like Olga. Learning about the new details, the investigators finally believed that the story about the doppelganger was not the victim's delusion and took up the investigation more vigorously. All the evidence pointed to a staged suicide, and the detective suspected that the pushy cheesecake-bearing client, Victoria Nasirova, was involved. But the search for the suspect was complicated by the lack of any leads regarding her identity or appearance. The situation changed when a private detective, a former police officer who had long been tracking the activities of the elusive con artist, visited the station. He had managed to track down Victoria on the internet, where she advertised escort services on dating sites and social networks. The sleuth suggested that this was how the perpetrator found her next victims. The scheme was ingeniously simple. Victoria would visit clients' homes, lull their vigilance with psychoactive substances, then freely rob the unconscious simpletons and disappear without a trace. Such a scam could have gone on indefinitely if not for the tragic circumstances in this particular case. After recovering, Olga shared the story of her poisoning on social media. And then suddenly, an unexpected twist, one of the subscribers recognized a similar modus operandi in the recent misadventure of her acquaintance. A man named Ruben Borikov, the owner of a dry cleaning business, had met Victoria on a dating site a few months before the incident with Olga. The woman, who introduced herself as a skilled cook, invited him to dinner. But as soon as the trusting Ruben tasted the dish, he passed out, and upon coming to, he realized that he had been robbed blind. Money, bank cards, and an expensive watch were gone. The bewildered man was convinced that he had nearly died from a potent poison served to him by the insidious person. The private detective suggested that in reality, there could have been many more victims, and Olga and Ruben were just lucky to survive the encounter with the malefactor. In 2017, the sleuth was approached by his client from Russia, Nadia Fort, who lived in New York, with a request to find her missing mother, Alla Alekseyenko. Nadia was born in Krasnodar but had moved to the USA as a student, where she met her future husband. Despite an unsuccessful marriage, the girl stayed in the States, building a decent career. She maintained a close relationship with her mother, who single-handedly raised Nadia and her brother. The woman was forced to work hard to provide a decent life for her children. In 2013, Alla got a new neighbor, Victoria Nasirova, with whom she quickly became friends despite the large age difference. Upon learning about the emigrant daughter, Victoria was determined to meet her at any cost. Alla arranged a meeting, and in September 2013, Victoria flew to New York, making a pleasant impression on Nadia. The new acquaintance even consulted with the experienced emigrant about the prospects of staying in the States. But these plans did not come to fruition, and Victoria returned to Russia, although she continued to communicate closely with the trusting Alla. In the fall of 2014, she was going to fly to America again and even offered to deliver gifts from Nadia's mother. Alla readily agreed, entrusting Victoria with a considerable sum of money, over $6,000, as well as valuable fur items, including 2 luxurious mink coats. But the insidious friend kept postponing the trip under various pretexts, causing concern for Alla and her children. On October 14, Alla finally called her daughter with the joyful news. After a serious conversation, Victoria had agreed to return the entrusted valuables. But soon the woman disappeared without a trace, stopped answering calls. It was completely unlike the caring mother who usually communicated with her children daily. To Nadia's anxious inquiries, Victoria responded evasively, saying that she had last seen Alla a few days before she supposedly went on a trip somewhere. The missing woman's son visited her home, but no one was there. A few days later, both received strange messages allegedly from their mother, sent from an unknown number, urging them not to worry and not to look for her. The style of the messages did not suit Alla at all, causing even greater alarm among her relatives. Nadia urgently flew to Russia to sort out the situation on the spot. The girl could not find the keys to her mother's apartment, so she had to break down the door. The dwelling was empty, and the valuables entrusted to Victoria were also gone. Nadia went to the police, telling them about her suspicions regarding her mother's neighbor. Law enforcement officers arranged a meeting between Nadia and Victoria, during which the latter became enraged when asked about Alla's fate, shouted that the woman was alive, but she did not know where exactly, and ran away. After interrogating the suspect, the investigators concluded that all the accusations against her were unfounded. They were inclined to believe that Alla had simply taken the valuables and money and gone on a trip, and would return soon. But Nadia did not believe this version. She felt that her mother was in trouble and was convinced of Victoria's involvement in her disappearance. Returning to her mother's apartment, the girl noticed the suspicious cleanliness in the dwelling where supposedly no one had been for several days, not a trace of dust, as if someone had thoroughly cleaned up all the evidence. Also missing were the $50,000 in cash that Alla kept at home. Nadia turned to the police again, but the investigators, who had already spoken with Victoria, continued to insist on the version of Alla's voluntary departure. Then the girl took the search into her own hands, calling all her mother's friends and relatives, posting flyers, visiting her favorite places. She even offered Victoria a substantial reward for information about the missing woman's fate, but she stubbornly denied everything. Eventually, Nadia hired a private detective who managed to find out that on the day of Alla's disappearance, Victoria had rented a car. Surveillance cameras recorded how on October 5, 2014, this car was moving along country roads. There were two people in the cabin. The driver was a woman resembling Victoria, and in the passenger seat sat a motionless 54-year-old Alla Alekseyenko. Nadia recognized her mother and rushed to the police with newfound hope. The investigators confirmed that Victoria had indeed rented that car and summoned her for questioning. Under the pressure of evidence, the suspect admitted that she was driving on October 5 but denied the presence of anyone else in the car. The woman was offered to take a polygraph test, to which she agreed. But taking advantage of the fact that she was released while awaiting the results, Victoria immediately fled the country. When it turned out that she had miserably failed the testing and become the main suspect, it was already too late. The investigators rushed to search for the missing Alla. Nadia spent another 6 months in Russia, assisting the investigation and hoping for a miracle. She even turned to Interpol for help. Tracking the route of the car rented by Victoria, the police came to a wooded area near Armavir, the fugitive's hometown. But all the girls' hopes were completely shattered when, in April 2015, charred human remains were discovered on the outskirts of the forest, located about a 3-hour drive from Alla's last place of residence. Nadia was able to identify her mother only by her teeth. The rest of the body was disfigured by fire beyond recognition. The cause of death was never established. Interpol declared Victoria Nasirova wanted internationally, but the criminal managed to evade justice. Nadia was devastated by the loss of her closest person, dropping out of normal life for long months. But eventually, she pulled herself together, vowing not to stop until her mother's killer was behind bars. One day, while browsing social media, the girl accidentally stumbled upon a photo of Victoria. The fugitive, while in Mexico, was openly flaunting her luxurious life, apparently believing that her search had been called off. Nadia immediately informed U.S. law enforcement about the criminal's whereabouts. It was then that she hired the best American private detective, whose fees were generously covered by a wealthy friend. The experienced sleuth, carefully studying Victoria's photos on social networks, noticed the reflection of a car's dashboard in one of the selfies. It turned out to be a Chrysler 300. By tracking the registration of such vehicles in the Russian-speaking Brooklyn neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay, where the malefactor was hiding, the detective managed the impossible, to find a needle in a haystack. It turned out that the fugitive was living not far from Nadia herself, together with her lover, in whose name that Chrysler was registered. Victoria clearly considered herself to be in complete safety, recklessly advertising her whereabouts. She did not even suspect that the noose around her neck was relentlessly tightening. The sleuth contacted Victoria's boyfriend, and the stunned young man admitted that he himself had nearly become another victim of the criminal. Before fleeing, she had traditionally poisoned him, as well as his beagle dog, which died. This news caused a new wave of public outrage, and close attention to the Nasirova case only grew. On March 20, 2017, Victoria was finally arrested. Nadia, private detectives, and the police breathed a sigh of relief. Leaving this dangerous person at large was extremely risky. A search of her home brought a new surprise. Law enforcement officers found Olga Tsvik's documents. It became clear why she had become Victoria's target. The criminal's visa was expiring, so she urgently needed a passport of a person with a similar appearance to avoid deportation to Russia, where an arrest awaited her. Investigators suggested that Nasirova planned to kill Olga and impersonate her. An examination of the cheesecake remnants, resent to the laboratory, revealed traces of phenobarbital. It was with this sleeping drug, significantly exceeding the dose, that Victoria sedated her victims. Olga was lucky to survive only because the neighbor intervened in time. After all, under the influence of high temperature in the sweltering apartment, the effect of the drug increased to a lethal level, and it was for this purpose that the criminal had set the heating to the maximum. But even in custody, Victoria did not admit her guilt, denying any involvement in the crimes. During the investigation, it was revealed that she had been a suspect in a fur theft case back in 2016, but the evidence was indirect at the time. Many other episodes came to light. The con artist would meet men online, then come to their homes, slip them a sleeping pill, and rob them. But most of the victims chose not to go to the police, fearing publicity. Due to the pandemic and the long wait for the case to be heard, the trial only took place in January 2023. Victoria refused to testify or cooperate with the investigation. The details of Alla Alekseyenko's murder were not considered, as this crime had occurred in another country. The defendant's lawyer emphasized the lack of evidence that Nasirova had actually added anything to the cheesecake and forced Olga to eat it. He appealed to the fact that Victoria herself had eaten most of the dessert. But the prosecution maintained the version that the drug was contained in only one portion, which the criminal was well aware of. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found Victoria Nasirova guilty of attempted second-degree murder. Despite the maximum punishment of 25 years, the judge reduced the sentence to 21 years behind bars. However, according to the law, after 15 years, Victoria will be eligible for early release. But the tribulations of the despised criminal began long before the sentencing. There was no trace left of the once striking socialite. Her luxurious life had shattered to pieces. The woman constantly complained about the horrible conditions of detention and beatings by other inmates. Nasirova even sued the prison management, accusing them of inaction, and was awarded $325,000 for the damage to her health. In an interview from behind bars, Victoria continued to deny her guilt, placing the responsibility on the victims. Allegedly, she had simply treated Olga to the dessert without any coercion and had tasted that cheesecake herself without any negative consequences. But all these pathetic attempts to rehabilitate herself in the eyes of the public failed miserably. After serving her sentence in the United States, the criminal will be extradited to Russia, where another trial awaits her in the case of Alla Alekseyenko's murder. For Nadia Fort, who lost her dearest person, it will be at least a small consolation. She continues to hope that her mother's brutal killer, who ruined so many lives, will finally end up where she belongs. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.